Hello, welcome to the Daily Commit. I'm Ollie Holmes, and in this channel we talk about software engineering techniques and best practices. This is my first video, and in this video I'd like to talk about Python Poetry, which allows you to organize your dependencies, separate dependencies and operational dependencies, automatically create, migrate, manage virtual environments for your projects, resolve dependencies to prevent version conflicts with a version lock file. It's very similar to something like the package.json for NPM projects, if that's something that you're familiar with, but with the power of Python behind it. Now we're going to start with the setup. So here we've got a completely empty command line, and I'm going to use pip-x to install Poetry. This is the recommended way of installing Poetry in documentation if you want to check that out. So here we're just going to install Poetry through the CLI. I'm using iTerm for this, my preferred CLI tool. So that was pretty quick, we're done. Going to clean up my CLI and begin by creating a directory for my new project. And then I'm going to start by using the inbuilt Poetry tool to set up my initial dependencies. So here you can see that I'm changing directory into the projects directory, which I keep all of my projects in. I prefer to have a projects directory. Now I'm making a directory for my FastAPI Python Poetry example, because I'm going to be using Python FastAPI for this example. Then I'm going to switch into that directory. And now I'm going to use the Poetry initialization tool. So we can give our project a name. For this, I'm just going to use the FastAPI example project as the name. Now, essentially, this will create a configuration in the root directory of your project, which will be the pyproject.toml. So we've got the package name, the version, and a description for the project. The great thing about this is that it can be used, that is the configuration that you'd be using to package your project as well. So you can see that I've comes with the author. Got the author for me straight out of my git config. And you can select your Python version. And to start with, we'll put a couple of operational dependencies into the project, and we'll also put a couple of dev dependencies in the project, which you can do at the start when you're doing the initialization with Poetry. So here you can see that I know that I wanted to use FastAPI for this project, so I'm going to add FastAPI. And for my development dependencies, one of the couple of dependencies I like to use at the moment is rough for linting and black for formatting. You can also use rough for formatting now as well. It's a great tool for formatting. But here I've decided to go with black. So now you can see that we've got an initial configuration for our project. This configuration is something that you can use for packaging as well. So I'm going to open this with code, which is going to open it with VS Code. And you can see now that I've got an empty project with just pyproject.toml in here. So what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to do my initial install of the project, and that's going to install the project dependencies that we just created, and it's going to create its own virtual environment and install those packages into that virtual environment for me. And this is all done with a simple Poetry install command. One of the great things I love about Poetry is how much it simplifies the process. And you can see now that we're installing all of those dependencies, operational dependencies and dev dependencies. And I'm just going to copy an API into this project, just a really simple API that I prepared earlier for this example, just a welcome to my awesome API. So now that we've got all our dependencies, we're able to activate a virtual environment for us to use for development. So here we are, and it's just with the simple command of Poetry shell. And now we can test our project by just running our very, very simple welcome to my awesome API. But before that, I just want to show you how great it is as well, because this integrates with your IDE. So now we can just select our virtual environment for this project, and it all just nicely links up and references the libraries that are installed for this project. Awesome. So now that we've got our virtual environment, everything's linked up, and we have an amazing development environment, let's run this project and see the result. So I'm just going to go get the example command, which is this here. This is the command that we use to run a local server for FastAPI and just be able to see a local version of this API running. Oh, looks like we've forgotten to install this package. That's okay. So let's go grab that package as well. So I'm going to show you an example of how we can add that package. So we just go add, poetry, add, and that package. And you can see here that we've just grabbed that package, added it to our project, added it to that virtual environment, and then we run it and it's running. That's how easy and quick it was to add a package to our poetry project. And now we've run that, we can see that we've got a local API running that we can test. We have a look at the documentation, very, very basic documentation for our main route that comes back with our awesome API. Look how fast it was for us to get a simple project up and running that we could build on top of. And you'll notice now, if you look into that pyproject.toml, that the new package would have been installed in that as well. So we're going to create a README file. Good to document as you go. It's kind of like cleaning as you go. It's important to keep detailed documentation in the repository for how to set up and run the project, especially if you're working in a team. So we can see here, for this example, I'm just going to put in that command that I ran before. So if someone was to pick up this project, install the poetry dependencies, and then went to run this project, they could very simply run it with the command that they get from the README file. And you can also preview this as well. So you can see here, and I like to put a bit of formatting into my Markdown so it looks a bit nicer. Also, some Markdown editors pick up that you've put in their code and allow you to copy it as well. So now we're going to talk about generating requirements. It's important to be able to generate requirements for distributing your project, although that's not something I'm going to cover in this video, but I just wanted to cover how to generate operational requirements and dev requirements so you can separate concerns when testing your project and when you're distributing it. Great, so we have a bit of documentation, and now we're going to add to that documentation on how to generate the operational requirements and the development requirements. So those familiar with Python will know that you have a requirements.txt that you can use to install requirements for your project. Now, obviously, we're using Poetry to manage our dependencies here. However, if you are distributing your software on some other system, or if you are creating a Docker to distribute your software in a container, you'd want to have the requirements to be able to install the software from the requirements. Now, it's also great to have the development requirements. Use cases for the development requirements is for running your unit tests, and if you are running your unit tests in a development pipeline, for instance, you want to be able to still install all of the requirements you'd need for that. So for instance, that you might want to do a linting check or a formatting check in your pipeline as well, and you'd want to make sure that you've got the correct dependencies installed for that testing procedure. So it's important to be able to generate the development requirements and the operational requirements and have that separation of concerns between the two files. If you wanted to put, say, your full requirements, full operational and development requirements into your software, you could as well. So if you're installing your package with your operational requirements, that would be okay. But it could lead to bloating out the software. I thought it'd be good to put in an example of unit tests as well with pytest and pytest coverage. And this is going to be an example of how to run your tests and also to get a coverage result from your tests as well. First, we're going to add pytest and pytest coverage to our project. And we're going to add this as a dev dependency. So you can see I've used the dev flag. I'm also going to install HTTPX, which is a library that is required for testing FastAPI projects with pytest. So you can see now that I've added pytest as a dev dependency as well. And I'm going to add pytest coverage as a dev dependency. So now we have rough, black, HTTPX, pytest, and pytest coverage for our dev dependencies, and we are ready to start unit testing. This is a unit test that I prepared for this example. You can see it's a very basic unit test to test our awesome API. So we just run that with pytest tests. That's going to test all of the tests in the test directory. And you can see that we've tested our unit test and we have a successful result from that. Now we're going to add the command to run those tests to the documentation. Always good to add the method to run your test to the documentation. So again, if another developer from your team comes along and picks up this project and they just want to quickly run the unit test to make sure that everything is functioning correctly, they can do that easily by checking the documentation and seeing how to run those tests. Now we're also going to add in here how to run those tests with coverage. So this will show how much of the code that you're testing is covered by these unit tests. In a perfect world, you'd have 100% code coverage. However, I usually aim for about 90 to 95% coverage. So here we've got the command for unit tests, and we can run that command now. And you can see that we have 100% code coverage, although our test was very basic and our API endpoint was very basic as well. But it's a great example of how to set up a basic API and set up a basic code coverage test for it and get a code coverage result back. So that's all that I'm going to cover today in this video. I hope that I was able to teach you something about Python Poetry and how it can be utilized in a project of your own, and how it can make your life a bit easier as it did make mine a bit easier when I started to use it as well. Thank you so much. I'm hoping to make more videos like this to share other topics and other techniques that I use myself. So please like and subscribe if this is something that you want to see more of. Thank you again and enjoy the daily commit.